Parents who have small children often encounter a stranger who appears in the life of their young child. The stranger appears to be a friend to the child. The child and the stranger socialize and talk. Often the child will approach mom or dad to ask for something on behalf of the stranger. Sometimes the stranger becomes part of a family, being present at any time that the child is present. The parents may ask questions about the stranger, but the only information that they receive is the information that the child supplies. We know this stranger by the term the imaginary friend. Today is the 27th Sunday in Ordinary Time. The readings today pose a question to us. They ask us to consider whether God seeks our friendship, or do we seek to be friends of God? In the first reading, Isaiah talks about his friend who has a vineyard that he's created through his own work. The friend, of course, is God. He has spent his time plowing, planting, and protecting it, anticipating the harvest and the sweet fruit that it will produce. But the friend is disappointed. The vines turn out to be corrupted, and they bear fruit that is unsuitable for any use. In his disappointment, the friend allows the vineyard to turn into a wasteland. The imaginary friend usually appears when a child is 3 to 9 years old. There's no apparent reason for the event, and it is not uncommon. 2/3 of children experience an imaginary friend. Imaginary friends are not dangerous or harmful. They seem to hang around as companions to young children. Numerous studies of this phenomenon indicate that the imaginary friend functions as a positive influence on the child. In the gospel today, Jesus tells a parable that is also related to a vineyard and a vineyard owner. The vineyard owner, of course, is God. And the vineyard owner leases the vineyard out to caretakers who are to tend it. For their work, they will receive a portion of the harvest, returning the balance of the harvest to the vineyard owner. When the harvest time comes, the tenants decide to break the lease, keeping the harvest for themselves. Now, the owner is extremely patient, repeatedly sending his servants to collect his portion of the harvest. When this fails, the owner sends his son, expecting that the tenants will recognize his authority and will abide by their agreement. Even this fails. Jesus then describes the terrible consequences that are in store for the tenants upon the owner's return. Children who have imaginary friends tend to be more imaginative, have richer vocabularies, and are better able to entertain themselves. They provide the child with a chance to work out relationships with others. Letting the imaginary friend ask for extra cookies allows the child to observe the reaction of the adults that are in the room. The child learns without taking a risk. Parents who recognize the imaginary friend as a proxy for the child can utilize that relationship to set boundaries and expectations, affirming the child through the imaginary friend. So, how does the imaginary friend, the vineyard, and the parable of Jesus bring us to an understanding of whether God seeks our friendship or whether we seek the friendship of God? The second reading gives us some clues. Paul is writing to the Philippians, and in the portion that we hear, Paul is encouraging the church in Philippi to offer prayers of petition and thanksgiving to God. Paul encourages them to consider and practice virtues of truth, honor, kindness, and purity as attributes that lead to the peace that God offers. By doing so, they will be connected to the God that they've come to believe in, while being shielded from the evils of the world that they live in. The two vineyard stories point to a God who is constantly working to connect with us, providing all that is necessary for us to accomplish that connection. The destruction of the vineyard, the loss of God's favor, come from our own selfishness and refusal to take what God offers us. We produce the unusable grapes. We fail to tend what God has given us. The destruction around us is of our own making. And it is not a matter of us befriending God, but rather that God seeks to befriend us. Just as a small child uses the imaginary friend to test ideas and to discover boundaries while developing relationships, we, as Paul writes, use prayer to ask God to participate in our lives. We refuse to be corrupted, bearing unusable fruit. We act as responsible tenants, recognizing God's authority. We follow God's examples of truth, purity, and honor in order to model ourselves after Christ. And we are validated by the peace that the Creator provides for us. At some point, the imaginary friend leaves the child. The friend has served his purpose, and the child has gained what the friend has to offer. Similarly, we as followers of Christ, through our acceptance of God's gifts freely given, are the new tenants of God's vineyard. Just as the child learns through the imaginary friend, we learn by observing the actions of God in the scriptures and traditions that we read and hear. In this, we can produce sweet fruit for God, ourselves, and for others. We become friends, God and us. And our friend does not leave us, nor is he imaginary. We can be assured that to the extent we seek and pray for Jesus in our lives, Jesus continues to be our true friend, remaining with us always.